is about little people. Hey guys, this is Brandon here. We have a great episode coming up for you. But before we get into that, I just wanted to tell you about our members group. We have a new members group that is going to have all kinds of extra benefits. So I would love for you to join our community, because that's what we're trying to establish here. We want to have a community around this podcast. We want to explore the strange and the unexplained and the supernatural all together. So check out our community. It's at unrefinedpodcast.com. Hey, everybody. It's us back. And with me is the great and infamous Lindsy Waters, the man with a plan. So what we want to get into today is, it's a big topic, and that pun is intended, and it's about little people, but not the kind of little people you're thinking about when you hear this. The little people we're talking about are more, well, how would you describe it, Lindsay? They're not what people used to politically incorrect call midgets. We're not talking about those kind of little people. I hate that term, but I had to use it here. We're talking about, what kind of little people are we talking about today, Lindsay?
Well, I think we're going into the more folkloric, supernatural,
mythical,
earth dwellers, gnome type beings that seem to exist in just about every culture, and have a lot of the same characteristics. So that must come from somewhere, and we just wanted to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring up gnome, because that'll get into, what we're going to talk about in a few seconds is size. But I'm looking forward to this. I'm excited about this. It's a topic that's not explored very much in our realm. It's here and there, but it's not really explored very much. And also the cool thing about this topic is it's so vast, it's so big, and I think that's just so ironic that it's such a big topic for such small people. If they're people at all. But I did say mythical earlier, and I want to caveat that. What we're going to talk about is, they're in the mythos of these different cultures, but yet we seem to think that they might possibly exist in real life.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna explore that, and possibly, some of the roots and all that kind of stuff. So
cultures today that seem to think they exist and speak of them in present tense, and
it's fascinating. I saw on, I think it was on one of my channels on Instagram. It was somewhere out on social media. It was a picture of like an Egyptian. No, it wasn't. It was South American, and it had a god with a beak, like a bird head, and all these different, just like a typical hieroglyphic of like a god. And then it showed the same thing, almost identical, in Mesopotamia. And that just blows me away. We're going to get into little people, because this does apply to that. But it blows me away that how does that happen? I mean, almost down to the same details these two diagrams are. And it's just no humanly way possible, except to be explained that at some point in time, possibly there was all one landmass and it was separated by the flood, or I don't know what the different theories of that is, Pangea, or I don't know. Anyway, but it's not a coincidence that these things look almost identical. And so what I thought we would start with is, what are some of the common characteristics of the various little people?
Okay. Well, for one, they're little. They're diminutive in stature.
All right, well, let's stop there. That's a question. That's a huge question that I have, that maybe you can shed some light on with me. In my research, I didn't really get a definite answer. All right, when we say little, let's set a parameter. What is little? Little is 6 inches. Little is 2 foot. Are we talking hobbits? Are we talking that fairy tale where they go to Lilliput? I mean, what are we talking about here by little people?
Well, man, just I didn't come across any standard size there, but significantly shorter than the average human. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
at least child size, sometimes smaller. I mean, yeah. So
So what
yeah,
would be yeah, so it could possibly be because, there's a place in Connecticut is where this guy built this I forget the town in Connecticut, and he built this little village that's been since abandoned, and it's actually you can go check it out. I mean, I don't know if it's trespassing to check it out, so if you go there and get arrested, don't blame me. But it was basically a village for little people, and the buildings he built they look more like for like people like like that cartoon show The Littles, like
yeah.
3, 4, 5, 6 inch type
Hmm.
people and stuff, and then we talked about, and we're going to talk about creatures that are like maximum 3 foot, 2, 3 foot pygmy type, and so yeah, I just want to kind of establish that like kind of foundation of what we're talking about, and I guess you have. There's really no consistent size, I guess, but I seem to think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that most of the mythos or most of the legends of these little people are usually more little child, 2 to 3 foot to four,
Yeah,
maybe even 4 foot size. Yeah, huh?
I would agree with that. I mean,
Yeah,
they seem to be about toddler size to most
yeah,
people.
yeah,
But yeah, so yeah, there's the stature. That's the obvious commonality there. But
yeah.
was this association with living in or under the earth, whether it's a mountain or a mound or mines or any of that? Um,
Does the
the
whole
term gnome, yeah, the
dwarf,
dwarves
yeah,
fall into that. But even the term gnome, I found out, is a fair might be a fairly new term that was coined by a guy named Paracelsus. He was a Renaissance era 1500s philosopher. I think he's from
yeah.
Switzerland. He actually
Yep.
wrote a book on elemental spirits.
Spirits. Yep.
And he dabbled in the occult. So
Yeah.
with your grains of salt, eat the meat, spit out the bones, yada
Yeah.
yada. But
Yeah.
he um, he may have coined the term gnome. He also used the term pygmy, the old Greek term. We're going to get into them more. Um, and he
Yeah.
probably just got it from the Greek term gay namas, which just means earth dweller. It
Mm.
sounds like he was just using an old Greek term, or maybe even coining a Greek term. The Renaissance guys were really into recapturing the old Greek and Roman knowledge. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
he may have coined that term, or it doesn't seem to have been written down before him. But regardless, the idea he got from ancient cultures. So, yeah, either way, he uses the term gnome and pygmy, but he may have coined the term gnome.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Our image of a gnome is usually, I hate to admit this, is like the typical garden gnome that you see, like
Yeah,
little statues people put, and they have the bright red hat, the beard, and they're almost dwarvish, dwarfish in
yeah,
a way. And I'd be curious to where they got that uniform from,
yeah. The pointy
because
hat.
yeah, it seems pretty consistent as far as when you think of a
Yeah,
gnome. Um, but in other areas and places, the gnomes and dwarves are distinguished like as two different creatures.
yeah, yeah. That's where I mean, there's so many of them, and sometimes they terms are used interchangeably. Sometimes there's a distinction. It's just such an expansive thing. It's kind of like talking about giants.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
but so yeah, I guess another common characteristic is just they're kind of seen as builders.
Hmm.
and cultural heroes, meaning they pass on knowledge to human beings. What does that sound like?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so they're not really typically benevolent, right? They're benevolent, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, they're not malevolent, but they can be.
Are they
Common
more
thing
like
I saw is if they don't like to be seen. A lot of times, if you see them, a lot of times they'll do mischievous or even downright evil things to you. Um, Kidnapping and murder were common things you see.
Yeah, I was gonna get in that in a minute about yeah, the stories of that. So my question is, you talked about Paracelsus and his name,
I think it's Paracelsus.
yeah, Paracelsus. I've heard of him before this conversation. I knew he was an occultist in the Renaissance. Now, what is the connection that he drew between the little people and the elemental spirits?
Well, he just says I can just read some of his a book on nymphs, sylphs, pygmies, etc. here in a translation. Their abode is of four kinds, namely, according to the four elements: one in water, one in the air, one in the earth, and one in the fire. Quick sidebar: Sword and Staff podcast. They still have all the episodes up, certainly on their old website. They did several episodes on this. I know they did one on the Fae or fairies that
Hmm.
where they did kind of a deep dive on elementals and have a lot of cool information about them. Check them out. They're no longer, at least for now, a podcast, but I think all their episodes are still up. Sword and Staff podcast. Josh Robinson, Richie,
Brock.
butchered his name. Yeah, Richie Brock. Sorry, Richie, forgot your last name. Yeah, they talk about this a lot. If you want to know more about it, those in the water are nymphs. Those in the air are sylphs. Those on
Yeah.
the earth are pygmies, and later he uses the term nomi. Um, those
Huh.
in the fire are salamanders. I don't know what the connection with the amphibious creature is
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
but yeah, they're just beings associated with what used to be called the four elements. Man, we could even get into the biblical elemental spirits or basic principles. Sometimes that literally just means basic things. That's the way it's used in Hebrews, I want to say. Um,
Well, what about Colossians?
but in
Didn't Paul
Colossians,
talk about?
yeah,
Yeah.
in Colossians, I think he's talking about elemental. And Paul seems to assume they're all bad, they're all fallen. Um,
Yeah.
some people, I think maybe even Josh and Richie entertain this idea that there's kind of a good, benevolent counterpart to the bad ones. And, I'm not going to say they're wrong about that. It may be, but
Right.
I don't see any evidence for that. But again, they could be. It's one of those things we
Well,
don't know. We don't know every spiritual being,
right.
every supernatural being, and the Bible doesn't give us details about every single one of them, so we just can't put too fine a point on it from a biblical perspective.
Yeah. Well, I've always thought the little people, they might be benevolent, that they've always been characterized as tricksters or
Yeah,
pranksters or is that a fair assumption? Is that in your research? Have you noticed that that's kind
yeah,
of a classification or a commonality?
yeah. I would say so. They're mischievous,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if you tick them off in some way. They'll ruin stuff. There's actually a story I found. Elton John. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Aluches, Alushob. That's the plural in the Mayan tongue, apparently. Um, the Mayan version of little people, and apparently most people when they come and do concerts in this certain Mexican city pay little offerings to the Aluches, and apparently Elton John didn't, and there was some huge collapse of his stage or something like that. Um,
And this is documented, huh? I mean, you can go on
Yes.
Google and
Yeah,
find
yeah,
this out, huh?
yeah.
I mean, you can't do the scientific correlation to it, but it is an interesting coincidence that yeah, he didn't pay homage to him, but yet he had problems.
Yeah, here he
Yeah, so
goes. Yucatan Magazine. So what's an Aluche and did AMLO make it angry? Um, President Obregon also. Not Obregon. Who is this? Obrador. I'm sorry. Andres
yeah.
Manuel Lopez Obrador. The Is he the current president of Mexico? I don't keep up with their politics.
No, only the last president of Mexico I remember is Valencia.
Vicente Fox.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Vicente. Yeah,
Anyway, he put out a picture of them of an alleged something in a tree. It looks pretty creepy. In the
wow.
same magazine article. But
Yeah,
he says, I share two photos of our supervision of the Maya train works. One taken by an engineer 3 days ago, apparently from an Aluche, another by Diego Prieto of a splendid pre Hispanic sculpture in Ekbalam. Everything is mystical. The
hmm.
location of the shot was not disclosed, but it was somewhere along the construction route of President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's pet project, the Maya train. The unusual post got media. Okay, so this doesn't. I don't know if this mentions Elton John or not. I know I found him earlier somewhere.
Well, it's in there, huh?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Elton John's concert stage collapsed in 2010 after Aluches were not consulted by organizers. Many people still
Yeah,
believe the oversight is responsible for the near disaster just days before the performance at Chichen Itza. Wow, that's one of the old important sites there.
yeah,
Yeah. His organizers skipped the tradition of asking the Aluches for permission to hold a concert on sacred ground. So yeah, these beings are still sort of propitiated by Mexicans and Mexicans of Mayan descent. You know, they're assumed to still be around. Um, and so yeah, this isn't the distant past to people. These are beings that are still around, and they never needed re-enchantment like we do. They've just always assumed these things. Still, the Maya and other cultures.
well, yeah, that's where they are at an advantage to us in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
We've according to Boltman, we've sort of demytholized our everything, the
yeah,
supernatural and everything in Western culture, whereas a lot of the people in the other 2/3 of the world, they haven't. They still have a supernatural worldview even to this day, and it's amazing.
yeah,
I think its value it tends to lead to superstition because they don't have a lot of them don't have the power of Christ or the
yeah,
biblical worldview to have authority or insight into that. But at the same time, they do have a greater understanding of how the supernatural world
yeah,
works or how the unseen works, and I think it's valuable.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Anything, I think we can use the what did Jesus say? You are not far from the kingdom. People who have a supernatural worldview to me, God can reach
Yeah.
anything, anyone. I was a
Yes.
agnostic before I knew Christ and very skeptical about everything. Um, but and there's just something about people who know there's a world behind our world and beings in that world that just
Yeah.
make people closer to the kingdom. And once they discover Christ and how he's Lord of that world and defeated some of those entities that have enslaved them in that world, I mean, it just man,
Yeah. Christ is
they
the victor.
they see
Yep.
something more powerful and they run to it. Someone rather. Sorry.
Well, that just reminds me of old missionary stories of bless their hearts. I'm gonna show I'm Southern. Bless their hearts. These I guess plain Jane evangelicals run into these mission fields, and the witch doctors have power, and the Christians don't have the faith to be able to combat that. They can't be the Elijah, so to speak, to combat the prophets of Baal.
Yeah,
And I think that is an excellent argument for the continuation of the spiritual gifts and the need of them. But even in a post Christian nation like America, there's still a need for them. In
yeah.
particular, yeah. But yeah, let's just shoot that rabbit. Get back to talking about the little people. Let's talk about some of the different little people from different cultures. We are there any more common characteristics that you want to bring up? Uh, I think you hit most of them.
Yeah, I think I did.
Yeah, you don't want to pee them off. You don't want to make them mad. Um,
Yeah,
because some of them, there's a mischievousness of prankster. They're small, 2 to 3 feet, average. I
yeah.
have a question I'm gonna ask in a minute or two that just got brought up because, but this is really not a good place for it. But so tell us about the different little people from different cultures. Do you have any certain cultures you want to bring up and talk about?
Well, I mean, we talked about the Aluxe, so I may as well start with them. They're the
Okay,
Mayan version.
yeah. Now explain to everybody where is Mayan territory in? Is
Well,
it mostly
mostly
in
around.
Mexico?
They were all over, kind of southern and the central part of Mexico at one time, but they were especially concentrated kind of in that Yucatan. And they were in Guatemala and Honduras as well. They were Mayan people,
Okay,
so they were never, as far as I knew, a unified culture. There was like city states, but
they share a common language though. They were like Greeks. They had
yeah,
a
I
common
mean,
common language, but different. Yeah.
the Mayan language is still spoken,
Wow.
but Mayan languages, rather, I think there's different
Yeah.
dialects.
Dialects. Yeah.
But yeah, they were one of the earliest, what you could call. So, I mean, they had a language, they had a calendar. I remember in 2012, all the fuss about the Mayan calendar, and possibly predicting some an end of the world. They didn't view it as some absolute end of the world. I don't think, and it was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. But I mean, yeah, they have several different creation traditions that were kind of thankfully recorded amongst all the stuff destroyed. Because they had a written language by
Yeah.
the Spanish. One is the Popol Vuh, and Thomas Ballantyne. He wrote a book called "The Maya's Own Words." He translated a passage about the creation myth of the Quiche Maya, um, and one of their, you know, prior to humans, there were these dwarf-like beings. That was the Alush. The creation narrative told in Yucatan also tell of a world before the present when the gods fashioned a race of dwarves
Hmm.
from mud so that these creatures would worship them. The dwarves possessed eyes, they could see the ends of the space and time. Before the gods could even fashion wives for them, the dwarfs began to ignore their creators. Rather than worshiping the gods, they spent their time creating beautiful pottery, writing books of prophecy, and constructing magnificent buildings of stone. The dwarves angered the gods so much that they sent a flood to destroy the world. They also destroyed the false sun that gave the dwarfs' world a dim light. Being possessed of a keen intellect and foresight, some of the dwarves managed to escape the water by stepping into ledges and caves in the Pook, I think the Puuc hills, where the hunchbacks live.
Hmm.
While the dwarves were hiding in caves, the gods fashioned a new sun and new intelligent beings to live on the surface of the earth and worship them. The gods made these human beings from corn, placing smoke in their eyes so that they would not be as clever and farsighted as the dwarves. And when the water subsided, the earth became a place of corn farmers.
Hmm. Interesting.
When the surviving dwarfs left the caves to venture out into the world again, the new sun immediately burned them and turned them into hard clay, Today, many Yucatec Maya believe that the small clay figurines found in the ancient ruins are these refugee dwarves. So, yeah. This also gets into some of the other names. We laughed at some of these when we talked about it before. The Yucatec Maya, the words for dwarf connect the Maya creation myth um, and the pre Columbian image of dwarves to modern narratives and rituals that focus on non human dwarf called the Aluxe, plural Alushob. The following list contains some of the vocabulary. I'll get into some of these. That's K apostrophe AT. I think that's pronounced cot. Dwarf, potter's clay. Cot pokot. Earthen jar. There's a word called ak, which means turtle. Kiss. Wild pig's navel. Very funny descriptive terms they have for them.
I'm waiting for the funny one.
Yep, here it comes. Hickis loom. Earth farter.
Earth farter. I love it, man.
And then there's Alush, of course, which they just
Yeah.
define here in this article as mythical dwarf, and again, earth spirit. So we're getting into the elemental thing there again. Deformed, twisted. That's Ushbil or Ushbil. I don't know how Mayan pronounce some of these. And Zion Winnicobe, hunchbacks that were turned to stone. Yeah.
That
So
sounds
yeah,
rather trollish. That sounds like a troll to me.
yeah.
You know, hunchback that turns to stone. Yeah, I just love the earth farters, man. If you've learned anything today in this podcast, you have learned that dwarves in Maya land are called earth farters.
So yeah,
Yes.
there's the Alush.
Yeah, the Aluche. Yeah, go ahead.
But another one that fascinated me was the Little People of Prior, partially because I spent a little bit of time up
Where
on
is
the
Prior
Crow.
Mountain?
It is in eastern Montana,
Okay.
the Prior Mountains, I think, and
Yeah.
it's. I spent a little bit of time up there on the Crow Reservation. Kind of stayed with a pastor and his family, and just learned a little bit then about the Little People of Prior, but read more about them later and found an old interview with a chief. It's a book. It's a complete book. Um,
Hmm.
Plenty Coups, Chief of the Crows. Plenty Coups. Uh, coup being a French word that meant to strike. Plains
Yeah.
Indians had this culture, had this custom in warfare where, yeah, you can kill your enemy, but it's even better to go up and pop him one and get away from him.
All right. Well, hey, pause there. Let's talk about that for a second because anyway, I was talking to someone the other day about that because when I was in Spain after I graduated from high school, there's a game that they play when you run with the bulls, and part of the game is they release them in the streets. You know, you run with them
Mhm.
and you run ahead of them and you try to get away from them, but you sit up on the sides because they put these rails up all along the shops. They have to. The bulls will go through the shops,
Yeah,
so they put these rails up. And everybody sits on the rails. And bulls are forward-sighted animals, so they only see straight ahead. They have no peripheral type vision, and so that's why they have to constantly turn their head to look you straight on. Which
yeah,
is, but one of the games that the Spaniards would play that they taught me was to jump down and try to kick the bull anywhere, but particularly his genitals. And and so that reminds me of that. But let me add one more thing. That and you know I have to bring this in. That also reminds me of the devil's game with the occult of how their goal is to disclose, like reach out and touch you, but not get caught, you know,
yeah,
with their disclosure things and with their rituals and who they are and all that kind of stuff, like hiding in plain sight. And so
yeah,
that's a fascinating principle or technique. I just I see a pattern there is what I wanted to point out. But yeah, keep
yeah.
talking about the little people.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's a neat rabbit trail connection there.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So yeah, the Crow have a tradition of these little people that live in the Prior Mountains, and uh,
What's their size?
oh, I don't remember actually hearing their size
Okay.
anywhere,
Yeah.
um, but
What's the size of a pygmy? Do you remember?
I the word is related. I'm going to get to them later. Um,
Yeah.
the word is
Yeah.
related to this term similar to cubit. So
Okay. All right, cool.
yeah,
We'll get there.
yeah. But anyway, yeah, the little people of Prior Mountain, they were like, yeah, and yeah, Native Americans have lots of little people stories. I mean, that would include the Maya, who we just talked about,
Yeah.
indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere.
Well, and then the infamous Cherokee little people, I forget
Yeah,
their name.
little people, me too. But yeah, I was just really more focused just because I had this personal connection here on
Yeah. Yeah.
the um, the little people of Prior Mountain. Anyway, Chief Plenty Coops was interviewed by a guy named Frank Linderman, I believe in the early 1900s, for this book, and he talks about his encounter with the little people of Prior Mountain. Um,
Does this book still exist? Can you get it on Amazon or
yeah,
maybe
I'm
find it on
looking
the
at it on Internet Archive right now.
Yeah, public domain.
You
Okay,
can
cool.
buy it
Yeah.
though. I'm probably gonna buy it one of these days. There's newer editions of it, and
Yeah.
yeah, Frank Linderman, plenty plenty Coops, Chief of the Crows. Yeah, he just talks about a lot of their folklore and even just stuff like archery, how he learned archery if you're into stuff like that. But anyway, when he was a young man, his people were together. He was a kid. He was like 7 or 8 years old. He just found out that his brother had been killed on a raid against the Lakota Sioux. Their enemies, and he was
Yeah.
just really having a lot of trouble. And he decides to go up into the Prior Mountains area and do a vision quest with some
Mm.
other guys, and kind of starves himself. Does the usual thing, fasts, and eventually is shown this. Let me find it here.
He's given some sort of a vision, isn't he?
Yeah,
And
yeah. Um, let's see here. The day was hot and naked. I began walking up to the top of the mountains, crying for helpers, but got
mm,
no answer, no offer of assistance. I grew more tired as the sun began to go down toward the west, and finally I went to my bed, lying down so my feet would face the rising sun when he came again. Weakened by my walking and days of fasting, I slept, remembering only the last rays of the sun. As he went into his lodge, he's speaking symbolically here. When I awakened, I looked and I saw that the seven stars, the Big Dipper, had turned around, the star that does not move, the North Star. The night was westward. Morning was not far away, and wolves were howling on the plains far below me. I wondered if the village would reach the little Rockies before the night came again. Plenty coos. My name was spoken. The voice came from behind me, back of my head. My heart leapt, I think, like a deer struck by an arrow. Yes, I answered. They want you, Plenty coos. I have been sent to fetch you, said the voice yet behind me, back of my head. I'm ready, I answered. He stood up, my head clear and light as air. The night had grown darker. I felt rather than saw some person go by me on my right side. I could not tell what person it was, but thought he beckoned me. I'm coming, I said, but the person made no answer and slipped away in a queer light that told me where he was. I followed over the same places I traveled in the afternoon. Okay, so yeah, this presence leads him to this lodge. On one side of it, there's normal sized people who represent things like storms and weather and things like that. On the other side, the dwarf chief, he calls them. I looked into his eyes. He was a dwarf person, chief of the little people who live in Medicine Rock. That's the Prior Mountains, which you can almost see from here, and who made the stone arrow points. I now saw that all on my side were the same as he. They were all dwarves, not tall as my knee. Okay, so yeah, significantly short here. This is about up to the average grown man's knee.
Well,
The
you
dwarf,
you need to also think about this too, and this is not stereotypical. This is just a cultural fact. Average Native American is about 2 to 3 inches shorter than the Caucasian.
yeah, okay, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the dwarves are little people. This is Frank Lindemann speaking. Are legendary beings supposed to possess great physical strength. In the story of Lost Boy, a crow saw one of the dwarfs shoulder a full grown bull elk and walk with it on his shoulder. They dwell in Medicine Rock near Pryor, Montana. The little people made the stone arrowheads. Okay, so they passed on that knowledge to them.
Wow.
Um, all the tribes of the northwestern plains with whom I am acquainted possess legends that deal with the makers of the stone arrow points, which are scattered so plentifully over North America. Um, so yeah, so
They had
yeah,
a supernatural strength. It's like they were
yeah,
little people, but they were giants. That's fascinating.
yeah. So in this encounter with them, they basically tell him how he's going to be a great warrior. He's going to count lots of coups and tell him what he needs to do.
Hmm.
Kind of give him his medicine, so to speak. And yeah, so that just gives you a taste there of he had a second encounter that's not directly related to the little people, but he talks about them. He talks about seeing kind of a tunnel or leading to Prior Mountains. The beings he encountered don't seem to be little people, but these were kind of his. He calls them his helpers, so they would have been involved. And in this encounter, he actually cuts off a tip of his finger to kind of
Hmm.
summon beings. So yeah, we got kind of that
Blood
spilling blood.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is interesting. After he tells that first story, Linderman writes, "Here the old chief, as though struck with remorse, turned his head aside and whispered, 'O little people, you have been my good helpers through a long life. Forgive me if I have done wrong in telling this to Sign Talker.'" That's what he called Frank Linderman. "I believed I was doing right. Be kind. I shall see you very soon and explain all." So yeah, he's afraid of he's worried that he shouldn't have blabbed the story about the little people
Hmm.
and apologizes to them. And later on, he even whispers a little, um, asks them permission to continue telling the story too. So yeah, he's kind of afraid of these people. He doesn't want to lose their power, and so yeah, we talked about that. People are afraid of kind of pissing them off.
Hmm.
Uh, that common characteristic. So yeah, the little people of Prior Mountain are one of these groups. So yeah, those are just two examples. The Hawaiians have this group called the Minahune,
Yeah.
um, who are much the same. Small people, you know.
Do they have the same mythos that if you see them, you might have bad fortune, bad luck? Is
I
that
believe so.
yeah?
They built temples and fish ponds and canoes. They were superb craftspeople. Um,
There goes that knowledge again, that secret
yeah.
knowledge. Yeah.
So yeah. Just we could go on for days and days about the different brownies. Though brownies, I read, were originally human size and later um, traditions were shrunk down for whatever reason. I thought that was interesting when I read
Were they
about them.
cursed? Maybe. I mean, that sounds like a curse. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it may be more they just changed the description of them over time. I
Hmm.
don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, there's leprechauns, of course. That may be a fairly new term
Yeah.
associated with the Roman Lupercalia, which has connections to Pan.
Hmm. Hmm.
Lupercalia celebration. But yeah, we know about them.
Let's talk about Spirit Mount in Vermilion, South Dakota. Tell us
Okay,
about
yep.
that.
Well, this was a okay, so yeah, it's in Vermilion, South Dakota. You can go to it today. And Lewis and Clark actually visited in their explorations in North Dakota. It's the Sioux claimed that it was a dwelling place of the little people. Obviously, Lewis and Clark didn't see any there.
Yeah. So what about them? What about them? Kind of drew. I mean, we're kind of just going over specific small little people. What about them took your fancy, or did that caught your eye?
Well, I thought the Lewis and Clark connection there was pretty
Yeah,
interesting,
yeah.
and yeah, just
They
they lived
mentioned it.
around.
Lewis and Clark mentioned that in their diaries or their
Yeah, yeah, they
documentation.
did.
Yeah.
They
Wow.
did.
Well, we all know about mounds. I mean,
Yeah.
at least in our belief, I'm sure in my belief, and I don't want to speak for Lindsay, but I think his too, is that these mounds in the United States are not originally what we would call Native American. They go further back than that. And if you really probably dug deep enough, you would find more ancient cultures than the Native Americans.
Well, to refer back to our "They Might Be Giants" episode, one of the old newspaper clippings we found that we referenced in there talked about finding pygmy remains close
Yes.
by some giant remains. So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, giants and little people seem to go hand in hand, and yeah, may as well jump to the whole pygmy connection
Yeah.
while we're
Yeah.
at that.
Let's go there. Yeah.
So yeah, the Greeks spoke of this group that they place in different places, mostly in Africa and India, I think. And the pygmy peoples, the actual ethnic groups, I don't know if some of this was based on them hearing about them or. But no, these groups sound more supernatural. I mean, these sound like, again, mythical beings.
Mm-hmm.
Mythical doesn't mean not true, as
Right.
always.
Right.
But yeah, the pygmies, the term pygmy comes from the Greek. They're referenced by lots of people.
Well, it's used now more as just a generic term for a small
Yeah,
person. Yeah, because like
yeah,
they called on some of the islands, the little small natives on islands that were short, they called them pygmies, even though they
yeah,
weren't
yeah,
Greek.
and yeah, it can be a very insulting term to a
Yeah,
lot of people.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it comes from these beings that the Greeks spoke of. Homer talks about them,
Hmm.
uh, how they battled with the cranes for some reason. Hesiod mentions them that they live near the Libyans, so that place is for him, at least in Africa.
Yeah.
Huge Gaia and bear these to Epaphos, soothsaying people, knowing this is from Hesiod's catalogues of the women, knowing seer craft by the will of Zeus, the Lord of oracles, but deceivers to the end that men whose thought passes their utterance might be subject to the gods and suffer harm. Uh, Ethiopians, Libs, the mare milking Scythians. For verily Epaphos was the child of the almighty son of Kronos.
Chronos, Saturn.
And
Yeah.
from him sprang the dark Libs and high-souled Ethiops, um, and the Katudioi, the underground folk, and the feeble Pygmioi. All these are the offspring of the Lord Thunderer Zeus, as the father of Epaphos. So yeah,
Hmm.
these Greek little people were viewed as descended from Zeus. Some of them say they were descended from Gaia or Gae, the original Earth goddess. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's your kind of pre-flood ECW connection with the little people there. The Greeks seem to think that they were descended from the gods in some sense, whether the
Well,
Olympic gods or the Earth, the Titan, the gods the Titans came from.
yeah, and see that goes back. I was thinking about remember when we were investigating the little people, we found that there a guy named Berger. I think it was on the island of Palua or something like that, Palua,
Hmm.
and they actually named this group of little people Homo florensis, I think
Yep,
they're
Homo
say,
florensis. Yeah, yeah.
and
So they found actual remains of
yeah,
something
of
that's not Homo sapien.
yeah. I have very little faith in this computer stuff where they add skin and flesh to these
Yeah,
images and make them. They made them look like little, animals versus any sort of a bipedal human, humanoid. But what I find fascinating about that is how, and I can't remember the place where those giants were buried with pygmies. Was it in Mississippi? One of the mounds in Mississippi that we dug up, or was it somewhere else? I can't remember. That was too far
I have to
back.
look
But
at it again.
yeah, but but it just seems like that this story of the little people, particularly the pygmies, that's why we kind of saved it for last. Just goes to show the correlation between the pre-flood, uh, the pre-flood oriented cryptid slash beings and in the after flood, and and how basically the Nephilim and these watchers tampered with DNA and created hybrids and did all that sort of
Yep.
stuff, because the pygmy seems to be a sort of a Nephilim or a hybrid, that they tampered with DNA, had the
Yep.
technology to tamper with DNA, which is obvious. I mean, the angelic intelligence is far superior to ours, and they have a lot more knowledge. But it also goes that the pygmies were Promethean in the sense that they brought the knowledge to us humans too, as well as the Nephilim.
Cultural
You know,
heroes. Anytime, yeah.
yeah.
Anytime you see that, there's that pre-flood Nephilim connection. I think.
Well, yeah. I mean, I personally think that they're an offshoot of the Nephilim.
Yep.
Possibly. I mean, it's a very anthropologically, it's a very good possibility that they're an offshoot of the Nephilim. We in the Bible, we have an indication of Nephilim only being giants,
Yeah.
but there's an interesting thing that was brought out to me this past week is the standard myth of Nimrod becoming a gibberer, which means giant. It never
Yeah.
really says that he became a Nephilim. It says he became a gibberer. And
Yep.
so we always equate Nephilim with the giants. But what if Nephilim is kind of like Elohim? What if it is a species? Is that the right word, or maybe a maybe not species? Yeah, maybe it's like a
Huh.
species,
Disease works. Yeah.
and there are different types. You have giant Nephilim, you have little people Nephilim. Uh, I mean, I'm just throwing out shade tree theology. I'm just speculating because I mean that's all you can do with a lot of this stuff. But maybe
Yep.
the taxonomy here, because they sound a lot like Nephilim in a lot of the characteristics that you pointed out, particularly the Promethean impulse to give knowledge to man.
Yep.
So I wonder if they're less cryptids and more possibly, just Nephilim. I mean, I know people already think that Bigfoot is a form of Nephilim,
Yeah.
uh, so an interdimensional being like that. And what if these little people are interdimensional beings
Yeah.
too? That's why you don't find bones. That's the big thing people
Yeah.
bring up is where are the bones? Well, a lot of them are in the Smithsonian. We know that, but where are the bones for the little people? Well, they were under Earth people. We don't know what is under our Earth. There is
Yeah.
a basically a huge river right in the smack dab in the middle of North America that we've uncharted. I forget what it's called. It's the tunnels with the water. What is it called? There's a name for it.
Aquifer. I think they call those
Yeah,
aquifers.
aquifer. Yeah, aquifers. Straight dab, right down through the Midwest. And
Hmm.
anyway, so yeah, I like your comparison there, particularly with the pygmies. But that leads to the other little people as well. Uh, just like we see Nephilim in South America. We see Nephilim in North America. We see in Africa,
Yeah.
different parts of the world. We see indications of these giants that were rulers, the Polynesian islands, Easter
Hmm.
Island. So why couldn't these little people we just discussed this? Let's just wrap it all up in a neat bow and just basically
Yeah.
say perhaps they are a species of Nephilim. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
and this can be refuted. I'm not a scientist when it comes to this, but this is just me kind of speculating. But that would be an interesting twist on that. And I guess my big question now, Lindsay, and I'm sure you've researched this. Where are little people mentioned in the Bible, in the Word of God?
Well, yeah, they kind of are. I'll be honest, it's not a strong
Besides,
connection, and
besides Zacchaeus, the wee little man, you know.
yeah, 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 or just the literal people with dwarfism that were
Right.
forbidden from taking part in the sacrificial life.
Well, there could have been a play there too with the little people with that too. You know, you had it was all about purity in the Jewish holiness codes and rites, and so it might not have just been the disease dwarfism. It might have been an allusion to the little people as well. I'd be interested in studying that Hebrew word and seeing what it indicates, the morphology of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, there is a Hebrew word. I've got to find it again. It's in Ezekiel. I want to say it was. Hold on, I've got it. The Gamademes were in thy towers. They hang there. Ezekiel 27. All right, I got to find something better than the.
Hold on, I'm pulling up my blue letter
Well,
Bible.
I'm going to keep this. This is the Geneva Bible, 1599. But the footnote, that is, they of Cappadocia, or Pygmies and dwarfs, which were so called because that out of the high towers they seem little. Well, yeah.
Ezekiel what?
Ezekiel 27:10 through 12. The Gamademes are some of the rabbinical literature
It's interesting.
considers them to be possibly some sort of dwarf pygmy type race from Kaftar, which I believe is Cyprus. Yeah. So
It
yeah,
occurs one time in the Bible. One
yeah,
Gamadines.
yeah, that's the closest that I could come to anything possibly biblical. They may have just been normal people from Cyprus.
Yeah,
Something about the Hebrew word can indicate a length of measurement or something like that. That that gave people this idea that they could have been pygmies or something like that. So yeah, the Bible doesn't directly reference them, but the elemental connection we talked about, the elemental connection to me is kind of a connection. If they're part of those elemental spirits, Paul
yes,
mentioned in
yes,
Galatians and Colossians for sure, possibly some other places, then they're just a part of the Nephilim, the gods,
yeah. The
the whole
hybrids.
kit and caboodle of fallen angels, Nephilims, demons, not all the same thing, but all on the same side that were
Yeah,
worshipped as the gods later and would have been included on some of these earth as a part of the earth spirits that were worshipped by people. A lot of the protector deities, the Lare of the Romans, which weren't depicted as little people, but they're sort of protector deities, hearth or home spirits, household deities. Yeah. So yeah, to me that's a connection. Look up the actual Greek term.
well. Let me tell you this. I'm looking up the Hebrew here. I can't. It's the root word for how do you say it?
Gamadine, I think is what I got.
Gamanines. It comes
Yeah.
from the word gomed or gomed, and
Hmm.
it means to grasp properly a span, a cubit. So
Yep.
it's a measurement. So I don't want to read into the Hebrew, but there could be a possibility of them being
Yeah. They were shorter
shorter,
people.
shorter people. And I don't want to sit here and say this emphatically, uh,
Yeah. They could have just been shorter on average than other human beings. Again,
Right.
it's it's
Right.
not a exact thing there.
But the interesting thing about that though is we don't want to demythologize the Bible like we did for years. At least I did for years. With we are like grasshoppers in their sight, and there are giants in the land. I always thought that was a allegory. Like we're just little weeny, pitiful people, and they're huge in number and they're mightier than we are. I took it more as an allegory and less as literal. And now I mean I can't read it and not see the fact that yeah, I mean, they even the example of the grapes they brought out,
Yep.
the giant grapes, and that had to have been done with secret knowledge of agriculture.
I
Uh,
mean, yeah, the giants were still existed as late as when
yeah,
David was king. So yeah,
yeah, yeah,
they really were giants there. Yeah, I used to think, oh man, the s- you know the 12 spies, except for the two who weren't, or just they're exaggerating, this and that. Well, they weren't. They brought
yeah,
back giant fruit.
yep. So yeah, I mean that, and we just bring this all back to a neat little bow here that there's a very real possibility that Nephilim is not is more and how I see it, I could be wrong, is more like Elohim. It's just
Yeah,
a species of spiritual being. It's not necessarily an angel because not all Elohim are angels. And perhaps Nephilim is in the same vein. Nephilim is just a hybrid, and there were giant hybrids and there were little people hybrids. I've never heard that before. Maybe we've stumbled onto something that could be a very real possibility.
yeah,
And of course, like I tell you guys all the time out there, eat the meat and spit out the bones. I mean, this is Hebrew morphology is not my expertise. I love languages, and
yeah.
I love Greek and Spanish and different languages that I know, but I'm not a Hebrew morphologist.
Me neither.
But just shade tree theology and investigation, it seems like it could be plausible, in my opinion.
Yeah, stoicheia is that word for basic.
Yeah,
Stoichion is that word for basic
elemental.
principles, elemental spirits.
Yeah, yeah. It has an occult connotation,
It does.
like elemental spirits, and that's interesting because in our world today, I saw an Instagram post, I think yesterday or today, talking about the influx in Hollywood of elemental spirits and
Yep.
how they're coming back through and that's just fascinating that the occult. I mean, they're on top of it. They know what they know. And
Yeah.
well, are there any closing remarks we want to make about little people? I guess I'd like to say this. I'd like to say if you have any stories about little people that you have out there, or any stories at all of any kind of supernatural thing that you've seen, any kind of cryptids or Bigfoot or UFOs or supernatural, paranormal, anything like that, you just shoot us an email at
Yeah.
Brandon at unrefinedpodcast.com. And just we would love to have you on our show
Yep. We really would.
and have you share your testimony and have you share your story. So we're out here, and we know the truth is out there, to quote one of our favorite shows. And thank you for listening to our ramblings about little people. We just thought it was cool and something that's not talked about a lot, and so we wanted to dive in. Lindsay, what you want to have anything you want to close us out here? Anything you want to say?
There was, I mean, yeah, so much. This is as broad as the giants subject, just because this is found in so many different cultures, which tells you
Yeah.
something.
Yes, which tells you
So many
something.
different little people, and yeah, it just caught my fancy, and I wanted us to do a little, probably more of a shallow dive, to be honest,
Yeah.
because We
Yeah.
could have gone so many other places with this, and
Well, but that's kind of our podcast where we're going with it. I mean, we like to take deep dives, but the basic gist or niche of our podcast is to introduce people to different topics from biblical worldview that they might not have heard before. I mean, there's whole echo chambers out there, people who get all the nomenclature and understand all the buzzwords and all that kind of stuff. We really want to break it down for just the average Christian
yeah,
to kind of see. We like to call them primers. So this was our
yeah.
primer on little people. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.